you submitted questions beforehand, so I will get to those after as well. So let's just jump into this. So last week I covered how to visualize your dream birth. If you haven't had a chance to listen to that, I will tell you how to find access at the end. But I definitely want to get that into your hands. It kind of sets the stage for training your mind for birth. Training your body is a whole different topic. The last part of this series, I am actually going to talk about nourishment and nutrition. That doesn't cover exercise or movement, but it's still a good piece of the puzzle. But nourishing your mind, training your mind for birth is really pivotal. Really, really pivotal. I share my personal story in that call, a little bit of how I learned about the power of visualization and how that applies to natural birth. Tonight, I want to just walk through the stages of labor and just kind of flow and energy for each stage. And I'll share with you the kind of the questions that we'll be answering throughout this. But what is labor? We could answer this in that kind of textbook, a scientific answer where it's like, okay, labor is rhythmic contractions accompanied by cervical change, which is effacement and dilation. We aren't getting into the nitty gritty of anatomy, but that's your thinning out. That's your opening of your cervix. That's your baby moving down stations. There's different measurements involved. But labor emotionally and spiritually is there's so much more, right? It's so much more than just having a baby. It's so much more than just contractions and dilation. Spiritually and emotionally, it's transformation of the family unit, whether you're going from a 2-person family to a 3-person family to a 4. I wish I could see your chat so I could ask you right now where you're at with that. But we just transitioned into a family of 6. It's your baby's first introduction to the world. There's so much that goes into that, so much importance. I read a book in midwifery school that really transformed the way I thought about just the whole experience for the baby. And by you here telling me that you're interested or preparing for a natural birth, that's going to do a lot also for your baby and for your baby's experience. We don't have time to dive into all of that tonight, but just know that labor is not just a physical event. It is emotional and spiritual. And that's why I want to talk about the energy and the flow of it. There are 3 different stages of labor. We're honing in on the first stage of labor tonight. So your first stage is broken down into these different phases. Your textbooks would say latent, active, transition are your phases of stage 1. I'm adding in another one. This is kind of like a midwife trade secret. I don't know what it's called. I don't know if it has a name. I call it the resting period. And this is where between transition and second stage is when your baby's born. Oftentimes at a natural birth, we see what looks like a stall. It's a resting period. And the best way I can put it is this is the way God designed it to where, as you've just kind of gone through transition, where contractions or waves or whatever you want to call them, you're going from close together, longer, a little bit longer lasting. We'll break these down. Into all of a sudden things seem a little bit spaced out. And if you weren't trained on it, and if you weren't looking for it, you would think, you might think something's wrong. Or in the hospital, they might say, failure to progress. We need to help progress this forward. We need to give her something. And really what it might just be is a resting period where your body is now gearing up, which is really cool. You need that extra energy for the next phase of second stage of labor where you're going to push your baby out. Second stage here is your baby's born. Third stage here is your placenta is delivered. For tonight, for this mini, we're just talking about stage 1. Okay, so stage 1 is broken down into those phases that I mentioned. Do I have them? Yeah, I do. Early, active, and transition. Now, there is something called Friedman's curve, and that is like your hospital standard, cookie cutter labor. And that's actually what hospital protocol kind of operates around, of what does a quote normal birth look like. However, in the natural birth realm, you might not see this cookie cutter labor, right? Because there's a million different ways women birth and a million different scenarios, and we're not augmenting with drugs or medicines or anything. And so it might not look like this, right? This is just for you to look at. This is what, like I said, what Standard Hospital is going off of, what they consider in the realm of norm. And so if things are outside of this box, this is when they might want to intervene. They might want to speed things up and so on. So the early phase of labor for me is like non-existent. It's very short. Right here, this Friedman's curve early phase says this is 6 to 12 hours. I tend to sit at 3-4 centimeters before labor starts. And even with my first, that was the case. So I really didn't have a whole lot of early labor. Some of you might have 2 days of early labor. Some of you might have early labor broken up certain nights over the course of 2 weeks. Active labor is really, we're going to break these down. Remember, that's what tonight's about. So I'm not getting into it right now, but that's up to 8 hours according to the Friedman's curve. That's where you're like 3 to 7 centimeters. You might not know how far along you are. If you're not getting cervical exams, I never got any. Not because I'm completely against them, but just because I never had a need for them, right? Like they can be really, really useful when you need information. If you don't need information, you don't need one. And I think that the less you do, the better. So many reasons why. Part of it is energy, just literally energy going back up and in when you're trying to have energy come out. Um, Also part of the mind game of like, what does a centimeter tell us? Does it actually tell us how much longer labor is? No, no. What really tells us how your labor is flowing and going is how intense or strong or close together or long your waves are, your contractions are. That actually tells us more information than a cervical exam. You could be 4 centimeters and be in really hot and heavy labor, and you could deliver that baby in an hour. But when you hear 4 centimeters, that might be discouraging. When you feel like, whoa, I'm really working hard. If I'm quote only 4, how can I keep going? So I don't love cervical exams, but I'm just giving you this information. This is the information that if you like went to a hospital natural birth class, you would learn, right? So it is helpful to know, because if you do get checked and you're between 3 and 7 centimeters, most likely you're in active labor, right? So go ahead and just take a look at this. I didn't mean to like dive too deep into this, but this is like the technical terms of labor, about how long contractions last, about how long this phase lasts, and about how far apart the contractions are. Now, as far as measuring dilation and effacement, we're not going to get into that, but here are the measurements of labor, the station being where your baby is, the presenting part of your baby, descending into the pelvis. And let's just real quick cover some signs of impending labor. Sorry, I hear some background noise. All right, so some signs of labor potentially coming. And these aren't necessarily signs that are telling us, oh, labor's coming in 24 hours or 48 hours. Some of these could be a couple of weeks leading up, but they're signs that your body's making change. Lightning, this is when you feel significant lightening up in your rib cage. All of a sudden you can breathe. Baby seems to have descended down into the pelvis. You might even be measuring smaller. Um, and like, that's the best way I can put it, is like you get a little bit of room back in your upper uterus. Um, that has to take place for some first time moms. Lightening doesn't really happen until early labor. For some of you, you might feel this a week before, 2 weeks before. Engagement of the head. Again, for some moms, that's going to happen during labor. The contractions are going to get baby engaged. If baby's head is engaged before labor begins, that's going to move things along a little bit quicker. You might have some warm-up contractions, things like Braxton Hicks, that aren't necessarily super intense, but they still, you're aware of them, right? Like your uterus is a muscle. It's almost like a tightening that you can feel. And it might even take your breath away, but it's not necessarily intense. It's not necessarily changing your cervix. You will start effacing. Your cervix will start thinning out leading up into labor. You might experience bloody show, although not a lot of people do prior to labor. So some people see this a day or two before labor begins, maybe losing their mucus plug. Some of you might see it in active labor. Some of you might not see any sort of blood tinge until pushing time. So it's different for everybody. Um, Rupture of membranes, this happens only 12% before labor starts. So for the majority of you, your membranes are going to stay intact until labor begins or active labor begins. Some of you might have your water intact until pushing, or you might have your baby in call. My water, I was part of the 12% for all 3 of my births. My water broke before labor. I kind of attribute that to the herbs I take ahead of time. But I also pray and ask the Lord for a sure sign that I'm in labor, because one of my big asks is that I don't want people with me during early labor. When we get into the energy and flow, you'll understand why. But I love that I have a sure sign. Like, there's no guessing that labor is coming. Um, you might experience GI disturbance, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, weight loss. All that is very normal leading up to labor because of the huge hormone change and surge that you're going to experience. You might get a sudden burst of energy in nesting. This is for sure for me. I start getting this like weeks leading up, and even in like before labor, right before labor begins, I'm like in this frantic frenzy to get everything prepared. Um, you might have a slightly higher blood pressure. That is something that I tell people to look for. Like, you might feel almost achy, like you're like a sickness is coming on, or like a little bit higher blood pressure. This is a big hormone surge leading up. Ooh, a bee just landed on my toe. Oh my gosh. Go away, bee. Okay. Let's jump into some of these phases. Now, what I want for you to take away from our next, 15 or so minutes together is I would love for you to feel confident in, like, how do I know what phase of labor I'm in without getting checked if I'm laboring at home? Oop, gosh. Or bees. Maybe I should take my camera off so you guys aren't distracted by all of the bees. Can I do that? Yes, I can. Um, what should my activity be like? I'm actually not going to go into the coach's role because I'm saving that for a whole entire call in this series. I believe that's our next call of the series. And Jeremy will be on that with me because I just think it's so important. The guys just don't get enough training, in Joy Within Birth in my community. After I gave birth to Jude, Jeremy jumped on and did a live call with me, and we kind of went into the nitty-gritty, and I'm so glad we did that because I really wanted him to say everything while it was fresh on his mind, but how he supported me in the different phases of labor and also postpartum. And the call was so helpful. I got such great feedback afterwards, that it was just really practical information that their husbands could glean from. So I was like, you know what? We're just going to make this its own call. So let me just check. Yes. Okay. Not next Monday because that's Labor Day, but the following Monday, September 9th, we're going to be talking about the partner's role in labor and postpartum. So we're going to answer that question then, and then kind of self-care and like what you could be doing during each phase of labor. So sorry about the bees. Okay, so our very first phase of labor is latent phase or early phase. And this is really the time to conserve your energy and to really go about normal life as much as possible. So you should be able to talk and walk through these waves. Like, you might feel them, but you could also say, "Oh, I'm having a contraction right now," or "I'm having a sensation," whatever term you wanna call it. Um, you should be able to go about your day, and that is the best advice anyone could ever give you for this phase of labor. Waves are short, they're sporadic, they might even be irregular, um, and so you do wanna kinda have an internal focus at this time. This is my time where spiritually, I'm just like, "Okay, Lord, I gotta lock into you." Like, whatever I'm in the middle of, whatever distractions, anything that's bothering me, I have to either deal with it or lay it aside, because you wanna start off this phase of labor with gratitude. Gratitude leads to joy. Joy eliminates fear. You don't want fear at a birth. Fear has no place at a birth. So whatever it takes for you to just get into that good mindset. So this might be listening to Christian hypnobirthing. Last week on the call about visualizing your birth, I talked about how I practice for labor. And when early labor is starting, and I can tell just because I'm starting to get these contractions, and for me, of course, my water's leaking and, I'm feeling different feelings and things like that. I go right into my exact routine that I have had been practicing for weeks, and I go right into either a bath or Christian hypnobirthing. But then I try to really go about my day. And now this flow is going to absolutely depend on the time of night or day it is. If it is nighttime, the name of the game, let me turn this back on now that the bugs are seeming to be gone. The name of the game, if it's nighttime, is go to sleep. And that is easier said than done. You're going to have a little bit of adrenaline, especially like my water broke for Koa and Harvest at nighttime. Like, well, actually, Harvest, I was laying in bed. I had just gotten in bed. So I had to really, I so excited, so joyful, so grateful. But then, okay, I need to get myself to sleep. So trying to do whatever I needed to do to calm myself. So for me, for Koa, I drank a tiny bit of red wine, which to me was a better alternative than like I don't have modern meds. I don't have Benadryl PM or any of those things like Tylenol PM, whatever. I don't know what they're called. So my game plan was like get in the bathtub, Epsom salts, peace and calming lavender, whatever oil is like your wind down oil. Maybe have like your husband rub your feet or put on Christian hypnobirthing. So basically, I needed to like bring down adrenaline after I of course, when my water broke, it's like joyful celebration, crying, praying, and then now it's like, okay, now operation go back to sleep. Um, and even though I am contracting in this early phase and in my sleep, I'm going back to sleep. I'm conserving all energy. Now, this was complete opposite for Jude because my water started leaking around like 2 p.m. or something like that. And ironically, I was trying to take a nap that day. Um, but then once I realized like this wasn't pee, this was my water, I did all the things to encourage labor, but yet still try and maintain a level of normalcy in the sense of, I'm not calling my midwife to come over and check me. I'm not telling everyone, that I'm in labor at this point. um, I'm still, making lunch on my feet. But then at the same time, I'm very cognizant that like movement is going to speed this up. So like once, I shared with you guys, my early labor is very short. I could feel things picking up. Now it's moving over into active labor. There's a whole different game plan for that. So the flow of this stage absolutely depends on when it starts. The goal is labor denial. You're not necessarily rushing anywhere, right? If you're delivering in a hospital or birth center, and remember, early phase technically is 0 to 3 centimeters. You don't want to rush to the hospital at this point. They might even send you back home if your water is intact. So really just getting into a good headspace. This is the time to connect with your husband, with the Lord. Maybe you do need to make some plans though. Maybe you need to drive somewhere to get, once once active labor kicks in. And so you need to maybe if you need childcare, whatever, like logistics that you need to take care of, definitely is going to happen here. But I also want you just to take a moment before you call anybody or tell anybody and just connect with whoever you're birthing with. If that's your husband, like whoever your partner is, for some of you, you could check in and like give your doula a heads up, but your doula is not coming over in this phase, right? This is just like alone time. For me, I really like alone time with the Lord in this phase. That's why I like the Christian hypnobirthing app. Um, and I make my petitions to the Lord. And somebody on Instagram had asked me to share my petitions, and I was like, man, that's hard. I have a lot and they're really personal. But I would take time, and I want you to do the same thing when you're doing birth visualization. You probably have journaled or at least have in your mind specific desires, right? So, for me, of course, the desires are just that I would have joy in this, that I would feel the Lord in this, that it would be a fear-free experience, that I would never be I don't want to say in pain because it is an intense labor is hard work, but that it would just be this joyful work. and just always praying over the, just the birth scenario, like who's coming. That my prayer is always like, Lord, whoever is supposed to be there, let them be there. Let me not hang on if someone can't make it. Like even up until my birth with Jude, I didn't know if I was going to have photos or a friend come over to be able to take photos. It worked out to where everyone was there. Everyone ended up being there. My good friend Kari came to take photos. I'm like looking at the birth spot over there. She showed up like 20 minutes before he was born. My friend Sydney was able to come take video. She showed up like 40 minutes before he was born. But I didn't know if anything would actually happen, if all of my requests would be made. But it was still during this time that I made my petitions to the Lord, but I also just kind of did, like I talked last week about the open hands of just like, Lord, however you want this to go, like, I'm just going to trust you with it. Whoever's supposed to be here, I'm going to trust you with it. I just pray safety and health and just that his presence would be there. So that is what I do in that phase of labor. Moving on to active. Active is definitely a different phase. This is where you're now focusing during your waves and you maybe are breathing during them or vocalizing during them, but you're not talking through them anymore. You're not walking through them anymore. They kind of require a little bit more attention, right? So one's coming and I just kind of go internal. And for me, my goal is always to like melt away, like just surrender. Let this process totally take over where I'm not fighting it. I'm not tensing up. I'm not holding any muscles tight. Like I just open hands, open mouth, open bottom, right? You might on the energy level be getting a little boost of energy. That this is where adrenaline now is kicking in and there's an excitement in the air that like, okay, this is real. For some of you guys during this phase, you're going to be heading to your place of birth, right? For your birth center or your hospital, or for your birth team. If you're having a home birth, this is the time your birth team is probably making their way, or you're at least giving them a heads up, right? Whether that's your doula or your midwife or your photographer or a good friend or whoever's coming, right? So as far as flow during this, the name of the game here is movement and position changes. Now, the perk of being natural birthing is that you can feel what feels good. So you're going to change positions according to whatever feels comfortable. Your body's going to know what to do. You're not going to have to be told what to do when you're laboring naturally. So for me, if the shower with one leg up feels good, that's the position I'm in. If getting on hands and knees feel good, that's what I'm going to do. If hip squeezes feel good, that's what I'm going to ask someone to do. If laboring in the tub feels good, that's what I'm going to do. But the trick here is you don't want to get stuck in a position for too long. So movement is really, really good. The goal here is productivity. I always tell people, if I'm like doulaing for somebody and they're kind of getting stuck in a position for a long time, maybe they're like really loving the tub and they're like been there in an hour and they're like taking naps. I'm like, look, you are welcome to stay there if that's where you want to be. But if the goal is productivity, like you want to encourage labor along and not get to any level of exhaustion, but just encouraging your body to progress naturally, then the name of the game is movement and changing positions. Okay, so I call this the labor dance. So the first rule of labor dance is number one, listen to your body. You're going to know what to do. Number two, stay fluid. Don't get stuck. I mean, I don't want to like give you a hard and fast rule, but like the rule of thumb I kind of gauge is like 30 minutes. 30 minutes is plenty of time in one position. Even 20 minutes is even better. When you're in hot and heavy labor, it's going to be hard for you to gauge time. And so this is where a partner would come in or a doula would come in and say like, they need to gauge how long you've been in a position, right? So my favorite kind of like combo is to go from the shower to the toilet to the tub, the shower to the toilet to the tub. First of all, the toilet and the shower is just really private. So there's not a lot of room in there for people, right? So that's typically like my husband and I, or like maybe my photographer might come in, take a couple photos, but for the most part, it's my husband and I, right? I usually have my diffuser going. I usually have my Bluetooth speaker, whether that's early labor. I really do Christian hypnobirthing. When I get into active labor, I switch over to my birth playlist with like worship and I just kind of tune into that. But this is this is your birth. So you get to do whatever helps you stay in the zone and makes you feel the most joyful and comfortable. There's something called the Miles Circuit. I want you to go Google that later. That is a trio of position changes where if labor is taking longer or you're starting to get tired or you just need a game plan for flow, that gives you positions. I think it's 3 or 4 positions for just keeping baby in optimal position and keeping your progression flowing and going. The second part here that is for the partner specifically is to help make sure that during this labor dance that you are hydrated and nourished. Those two things play a vital role in natural birth. If you start getting dehydrated, your uterus is going to get exhausted. It's a muscle. It's going to pucker out. It might contract still, but it's not progressing labor enough. It's not productive. It's not moving your baby down. It's not pushing your cervix open. So you need to hydrate and nourish your uterus so that it can stay strong, right? So it's a really good idea to have like a labor snack bag ready to go that they can easily pull from, your birth team can easily pull from. I have things like powdered miso soup, which is really loaded with amino acids and nourishment, and electrolyte packets, coconut water, Ningxia, nitro, hi Koa. Um, Bone broth, I do powdered bone broth. At my nesting party, we made things like labor gummies, which was really wonderful. It's like light on the stomach, but supports gut health and yummy and gave you a little bit of energy because it had some honey maple syrup in there. Honey sticks are great. Fruit is great. Active labor, you're not going to want to eat a ton. Like this isn't the time that you're going to be like, I'd like a steak sandwich, please. Like you might be able to do like a smoothie, but um I can give all sorts of ideas for labor snacks, but that's the job of your husband or your partner, your doula or whoever, is to really stay on top of that. And not only that, but to make sure that as much as you're hydrating and drinking these electrolytes, these minerals, you're going to the bathroom, you're peeing, you're keeping that open. Number one, that gets you going to the toilet a lot. The toilet, if you've ever heard dilation station, you're going to open up a lot on that thing because you're used to opening up on that thing. So you can sit, you can, and I do want to warn you, it does make contractions intense, but it does speed it up. But also urinating frequently is also just going to keep things flowing, the baby's head is going to continue descending down and down. If you have a full bladder, that is going to prevent your baby from coming down. It's going to make your contractions more painful. It's just going to cause discomfort in general. So as you're staying hydrated and nourished, you're urinating frequently. I'm talking like all the time urinating. I even got to a point in like active labor transition where I would just stand and have a contraction and just stand over a Chuck's pad and go pee. Now, during the labor dance, if you feel like you need a rest, and that's perfectly okay and normal, the best way to do that is to lie on your left side. That's going to offer the best circulation. And just put like a bunch of pillows between your legs, or if you have a peanut ball, but basically you want to keep your hips and your pelvis open, but you want to not have any tension. You want to relax, let your legs kind of relax and melt onto that. Hi, Harvest. My kids are saying hi to me. All right. A few birth support tools that I just wanted to mention here. I go deep into this in my module in Joy Within Birth, but just here's like a list of some things that you will probably pull out, or whoever's laboring with you will pull out, that can be really great for comfort measures in this part of labor, in active labor and in transition. So I mentioned the birth ball or the peanut ball, the rebozo. Of course, I use a lot of hot and cold water, going from a hot shower, cold rags on my neck, essential oils. That's a whole class in and of itself, but I use essential oils for emotional release, for grounding, for calming. I also use them to stop a bleed. I also use them to help my uterus to stay contracting, to encourage the flow of labor. So there's a million different uses for them, but I never would labor without them. They are incredible for emotional and physical support. Of course, like, have music ready, like, have a birth playlist ready. There's times where I really, like, know words and just kinda, like, instrumental, and then there's times where I really hone into the words, but have it ready to go. Of course, Christian hypnobirthing app I've mentioned, like, 5 times tonight. I really love that tool. Alright, let's talk here about the transition phase of labor and the flow and the energy here. I'm trying to stick to time. So some signs here that you are in transition. This is where emotionally I feel a little overwhelmed with emotion. I might cry out of joy. I might cry out of intensity. I have a lot of rectal pressure. You might feel like the urge to poop in this phase, and that's because your baby is descending lower and lower. You might feel hot and then cold, and then that you like to be touched, and then you don't like to be touched, and then you like that music, and then you don't like that music. Kind of that, indecisiveness, just, like, really trying to figure out, like, "How am I coping in this thing?" And that's okay, and that's normal, and I'm just telling you this because I want you to be able to identify transition, and not in a way where you're scared of it, but that you're encouraged by it. If you can train your mind to tell yourself transition means my baby's coming soon, then transition is now a source of joy that this is actually what you want. You don't want to be in early labor for 24 hours, right? You want labor to progress. You want to get into transition because you want to push and you want to hold your baby and you want that finish line, right? So when you're noticing, and maybe not, maybe you're so in the zone during this that maybe your partner, this is important for them to know that, okay, I'm seeing all the signs of transition. And you guys, you can tell transition without a cervical check. You can totally see this. Um, Other signs would be like maybe nausea and vomiting, totally normal during this, maybe pooping during this because of all the pressure coming down. It's hard to take direction during this phase. You're kind of tuned out. You're really focused on yourself. And so you might, people might be asking you a question like, do you want, a snack? And you might just look at them and be like, I don't even know what language you just spoke. If you're doing that, and obviously I feel like I'm talking to like the birth partner right now. If she's doing that, she's in transition, and this is the time now to whip out affirmations and to say things like, "You're almost there. You're doing it. You're gonna meet your baby so soon." Another really, like, obvious sign of transition is where in active labor, maybe between the contractions, you were very, vocal and like, "Okay, focus, breathe, relax during a contraction." That wave passes. Now you're like, "Hey, I'm here. I'm laughing. I'm talking. I'm myself." Well, during transition between the contractions, it's more of this internal rest and maybe even falling asleep, and that could be, kind of just what you need to focus on energy-wise on what's coming next for pushing your baby. That also could just be because these contractions are back to back or they're longer, and so you're really recuperating and recovering between them. So you're really just taking the time between the contractions to rest. And so that's a sign of transition. If you're sleeping between contractions or your eyes are closed and you're no longer that like talkative self, that's the good sign. That energy is very good and normal for this phase of labor. Now, as far as flow, same thing as active labor, movement and position changes for comfort. So you're moving in a way that feels good. You're moving in a way that you can relax the most. You want to release any sort of tension here. You don't want to fight transition. You want transition. You embrace transition. And so whatever it takes for you to feel like you can really surrender, then you're going to open up the best. Your goal here in this phase emotionally is to just stay in the zone. Okay. And so that's why, like, if you're feeling at all overwhelmed with the people in the room, distractions, this is where your partner, you need to be able to say, like, "I need alone time," and you need to kick people out of the room, or you need to go back to the bathroom, to the toilet where no one's gonna bother you, or you need to put Christian hypnobirthing up louder, or turn off lights. And again, I'm talking to the partner here too, because when you're in transition, you're not really able to take care of yourself and your environment the way that you were before. So this is really crucial that your birth team is honing in on this part of labor and tuning into the energy and the flow. Physically, you're coping, you're just doing whatever it takes to be able to really let go and to not hold any tension in your body. And this is the really exciting part of labor. This is where I get like teary-eyed, like, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna meet my baby soon." Okay, I really hope that Connection is good. Okay. This is just a quick I talk about this in my ebook. If you have not picked up my ebook or read it, you need to because I talk about this in there, but this is the pain fear cycle, and we wanna break that. We want this to be the joy cycle, right? So, at any point in your labor, especially transition, where if you're feeling any sort of fear or stress or anxiety, you're building up a bunch of that adrenaline, that fight or flight. That then leads to rapid breathing, nervous energy. You're not absorbing oxygen the way that you should. Go away, B. And that leads to tense muscles in your jawline, tense muscles in your pelvic floor, decreased oxygen to the uterus. So your uterus is working harder, not smarter. It's like you're contracting, but because there's decreased oxygen to the uterus, that's not good, first of all, for the baby, right? But that's not gonna make your labor productive, and that's gonna increase pain and increase your perception of pain. So the opposite in this setting, in this phase, is slow, controlled breathing, relaxed muscles, oxytocin's flowing, smooth labor. And remember, it started here with fear. And so it's really, really, really important. I love using release oil in this part of labor and valor in transition, but it's really important that at any point, if you're nervous about something or fearful, even if it's the thought of like, I don't think I can do this, you need to speak that out loud to your birth partner, because they then need to speak truth over you and pray over you and remind you or read you affirmations and remind you, you actually can do this. You were designed to do this. Your body knows exactly what it's doing. And even to remind you, don't be scared of transition. That's just your baby coming. This is what you want. And just reminding you, like, this is joyful. This is a good thing, right? So it's good to identify it so that we can break any cycles. If there's any fear, speak it out loud. It will not have the power, right? Don't keep it in your mind. Um, as far as the second stage of labor, which is quite literally birthing your baby, and I'll kind of just end it with this. Um, you most likely, when you're natural, have the fetal ejection reflex, which is where you aren't in control of your pushing just happens. It's like when you get the urge to poop, it's like, oh, here comes my baby. I'm pushing. Wow, didn't even mean to do that. I'm like, my body's just doing it. For some of you, I know like I have several clients that never felt this until they had pelvic floor therapy. You might be a little numb to this and might need to actively push. But if you wait and labor down until your baby gets really low on the pelvic floor, chances are increased that you're going to feel this. Turtling is when the baby's head kind of plays peekaboo, and it can be a little um discouraging if you aren't familiar with it and you're like, wait, I'm like seeing my baby push or feeling my baby. Maybe you have a mirror, maybe you have your hand, or maybe they're telling you, I see head, and then it goes back up, and then I see head, it goes back up. That's normal. That's part of the baby adjusting, getting into the right position to fit great, to prevent tearing. That's also part of the baby just kind of molding their head and their skull bones to be able to fit properly. So turtling is progress. It really, really is. It doesn't necessarily mean anything's wrong. It just takes a little bit of time to labor down sometimes. Vocally, you might be grunting like, like, what did I like I'm taking a poop. Like it's just like this uncontrollable kind of sound. And that for me as a birth worker, I hear that and I'm like, okay, baby's about to come out. Now, energy for this stage of labor, it should be just calm, focused, quiet, internal. You might have had a different experience here. If you've ever seen a birth story, TLC, they have a different experience. Maybe you've had an experience where you were numb or your feet were in stirrups or you just had guided pushing, or maybe you've had experience purple pushing, and that's where like your legs are in the stirrups and you're in McRoberts holding your legs and they're counting to 10 and you're holding your breath and you're pushing with all your might. That is quite the opposite of that energy, right? That's really strained. That's really like trying to be super powerful. When you're naturally pushing, and I say naturally, like on your own terms, maybe in the water, or maybe just, not guided, there is a quiet internal calm to this whole ordeal. It is totally great and normal to be vocal. I'm not saying you have to be quiet in that sense. Um, but it's more of like this internal quiet and this focus. And the best way I can put it is like when you have experienced that type of purple pushing, it's really hard to get it out of your mind that pushing should be different or could be different. And my pelvic floor therapist, basically, the best way she described it to me was Pushing is actually you getting out the way and letting your body open up. And so for you, what that means for your flow is you want to push in the most comfortable position where you feel like your pelvic floor can actually open. If you're straining and you're actually, like, pushing against it, that's when your pelvic floor tightens, and that's when you increase chance of tearing, and so that's why I love birthing in the water. I really felt like with Jude, I was able to just breathe him down. I don't recall but, like, maybe 2 or 3 active pushes for him, which was really wild to be quite literally pain-free in that experience because I had no idea he was about to come out. For Harvest and Koa, there is significant, like, time where they were kinda just sitting on my perineum, and I could feel that ring of fire, and I could feel being stretched, and I could feel them coming down, and for Jude, it was, like, literally shocking, and I think part of it was just I was completely surrendered, and that's my goal in this phase for you too, is the surrender and the trust. If you just let your body do what it knows to do and you kind of emotionally, mentally, "Be go away," get out of the way, your body knows how to open up when we don't fight against it. And so physically, you're slowing down. That's what you're doing energy-wise too in this phase. You're probably wherever you're pushing, hopefully is where you're the most comfortable. So whether that's hands and knees or squatting or standing or laying on your side, or maybe some of you laying on your back is your most comfortable. Actually for Koa and Harvest, I really liked that kind of semi-reclining in the tub. For Jude, I was sitting upright on my knees. And so really whatever you feel like you can just open up the most by relaxing the most. That's your goal for here. I also mentioned Kiko for that. That's where your knees are in and your calves are out. If you've ever seen a video like this actually opens the inlet of your pelvis and makes room. So if you're actively like in that pushing phase, excuse me, think about getting your knees in that position if you haven't tried that, and that can significantly open your pelvic inlet. Okay, I'm stopping it here for sake of time. If you text, see that number right there? If you text the word flow to 985-218-8868, feel free to take a picture of that. I am gonna send you if you're interested in joining Joy Within Birth and getting kind of the full module of this, this is where I cover all these extra things like birth positions, comfort measures, more of an anatomy of birth. You get access to the doula guide, which is a really great tool for your husband or birth partner to have. You get that totally for free. You get my cervical prep plan. We go into more of true versus false labor. And then, of course, birth planning, which is very involved, kind of talking about like, actually what like, writing out your birth plan, talking about interventions, all of that's covered in this module. If you're interested in that, text flow to that number right there, and I'm gonna give you a discount code. It will expire in a couple weeks, but I wanna give it to you. I can also give you access to my ebook if you haven't had that. And then the last thing I wanna show is just some resources. These are some of my favorite books. Of course, if you're in Joy Within Birth, I know some of you in here are in that community already. All of my modules cover books that I've read and trainings that I've taken and midwifery school. So if you're like, hey, I'm like 30 weeks pregnant, I don't have time to read 12 books. Come join Joy Within Birth and let me teach you from all of the books and the trainings I've had over my 12 years of doing this. And then I just mentioned a couple other resources there, Instagram pages. Of course, my Instagram page is just Hailey Aliff. A couple others there, and then the Christian Hypnobirthing app. Um, Let me go ahead and stop. I hope this was helpful and valuable. Now that I'm not screen sharing, I can see all of your messages. If anybody has a question for me, this is the time to answer it. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. That way, if anybody has like a personal question, we can answer it. But I hope this was helpful. And just as a reminder, not next Monday, but the next call in this series on September 9th, we're going to be talking about the partner's role in labor and postpartum. And Jeremy will be on that call with me. So I'm really excited for that.